Okay, well, let me go ahead and get us started today. I'm Kellye Testy, and I'm serving now as the Executive Director and CEO of the Association of American Law Schools. And so it's my real honor and pleasure today to be able to welcome you to the AALS Institutional Advancement Conference. This is our virtual conference held mid-year, so to speak, outside of the annual meeting. And I just want to let you know how happy I am that you've joined us. Before serving in this role, I was at the Law School Admission Council, but before that, I was the dean of two different law schools. And I mention that because in each of those instances, the advancement operations were very different. I was dean at Seattle University right after it was acquired. And so we really had to build an advancement operation from the ground up. And then when I joined the University of Washington, it was the same town, but very different institution, 120 years old and very big R1 university. It had a very different approach to advancement, a very well-built one that had been operating for a long time and very integrated with the university. So I know firsthand from having served as dean for a total of about 15 years and working very closely with my advancement dean and team, just how vital this role is that you all play in your law schools. And I want to thank you for your effort. What you do couldn't be more important. You're telling the story of the law schools, you're communicating the goals, you're helping the strategy move forward, you're side by side with your dean and leadership, making what the school wants to do possible and building that great pyramid of involvement of alumni and friends and donors. So please know of my great regard for your work. And I think that all deans share just great appreciation for the work you do. This section on institutional advancement is one of our largest. We have over 100 sections. I think this is about the fourth largest section, and it's celebrating a 40th anniversary this year. So it's been around a while and has a lot of good history that we can use to build on and learn from. I want to urge you to stay involved in it. Please, it is what you make it. And so I really want to encourage that. At the annual meeting this year in January that takes place in San Francisco, there'll be more opportunities for the section to hold programming and for you all to network with one another. And I know how vital it is that you have that time to just talk in the hallway and learn from one another like you're going to do today. So I hope you can go. I'm going to be urging deans to go and to support their advancement deans in going. So I look forward to seeing you there. And I hear there's already a lot in the works, including a trip to Sausalito. And that's a beautiful and wonderful place. So in addition to being a great learning opportunity, it should also be a lot of fun. Well, I want to kind of get out of the way and let you at it today for your learning, but I did want to just let you know how much I appreciate you. Every day you're out there doing the work that we really count on to build excellence in legal education. So know of my gratitude and respect and support for all that you're doing. And with that, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank Jayme Little at Indiana McKinney and also Heather Rappaport at UNLV for being the great leaders for this program today. And I'm going to turn it to them to hand off and let Jayme take it from here. But have a great session together, and I hope to see you in San Francisco. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Kellye, for kicking us off today the right way. So happy to see so many colleagues from across the nation joining us today. We're going to kick it off with our first session today with Chris Marshall from CMAC, maybe a familiar name to many of you as he hosts a weekly podcast called Alumni. That I know I listen to pretty regularly. It was for some tidbits and wisdom on the profession. He is an expert in this field, many years of experience in alumni relations, engagement, and development work, and now he helps coach others through their growth in the field. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for our first session today.
Great. Jayme, thank you so much. And Kellye, thank you. And I'll add to the warm welcome to all the folks here on the advancement side at all the law schools out there. We have 161 on right now, and we're excited that you're here. And for those that caught the name of our podcast, it's called Alumless. You can find it on any podcast streaming service. And we did steal it from those of you know of the podcast called Smartless, which is where they have 3 people interviewing a guest that comes on each week. And we have a similar format. There's 2 of us. We bring on a guest each week and we talk about issues in advancement. And we've had 57 episodes and they're all available to listen to. So here's a plug opening up here, but I'm going to share screen and start with some slides. And we're going to talk about integrated advancement is how I call it, the broad name for it. And our agenda for today is going to be in this 1 hour window from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. I know we have people from different parts around the world here, around the country. So we'll go through into it. But the main part of the conversation will be about this integrated advancement. I'll talk about that and give it a high level definition as well. There's a continuum. I see schools spending their time in this area. We'll go through that. I'll give you a couple examples of models out there. We'll talk about this approach to thinking about your alumni population. I have some advice around, anytime you do anything, you ask these 6 questions, and there'll be time at the end for Q&A. But I shared it with the folks as we were getting ready for this. I'm absolutely happy to take questions as we go throughout. So I think there's a Q&A function and a chat function where you can add things to. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to lean in, and one of the panel or moderators will jump in and ask the question on your behalf if you have something at a moment in time where it would make sense to ask it in the context of what we're talking about. So I have no problem with folks saving questions to the end or asking it during. Please jump in. I want this to be interactive if we can make it so. So what we're talking about, this first topic, the main topic here is this. This is what was talked about in the description on this for the session, and it was, how do we look at alumni relations and communications through a development lens? And the summary of this simply is, you've all heard the conversations about, if you're in the advancement space, you've talked to colleagues and you've had conversations with deans, I'm sure, where you ask the question about how do we get the right people in the room from an event context. It's how do we get the right people in the room? From a volunteer context, how do we get the right people to become and serve as our volunteers? And from a communications context, I think it's a little deeper. It goes, how do we make sure we're communicating with the right people in the right manner that they want to be communicated with, about the stuff they care about, the right stuff, from the people that make the most sense to be communicating with them. So it's all of those things. And when I say the right people, I'm talking about with a development lens on the ability for someone to make a gift. Now, you should all know a little bit about me. I'm an alumni relations person, 24-year career in this space. I worked at Lehigh University for 7, at Cornell University for 5, and for the past 12 years, I've been consulting with about 200 different colleges, universities, including law schools, but lots of central programs that connect to a law school, etc. I do this work all the time. So I'm an alumni relations guy, an alumni engagement person. But I firmly believe that we should be thinking about, our industry should be moving towards thinking about, how do we connect so that the outcomes of a good alumni engagement program includes lots of things: recruiting students, helping students while they're enrolled in terms of retention, but also hiring and placing students in career opportunities. And these are all things that you think about in law school. But one of the outcomes of good alumni engagement should be unapologetically good fundraising. And when I talk about the right people in the room, I'm talking about getting people who have capacity and inclination to make gifts to support the mission of your particular school. And that, I understand, in the world of alumni engagement, is a controversial position to take. 20 some odd years ago when I started, if I went to a case conference, for example, and I started throwing around, let's get the right people in the room, they'd probably run me out the door. And now, as we've gone through the last several decades, there's increasingly space in our field to support this notion that that engagement leads to giving and other things. I get it. I'm talking about measurable outcomes for the work that we do, and engagement leading to giving is one of those. And by the way, it's one of the ones that your boards care most about, your deans, your university college presidents think about as well. These are all audiences that care a lot about ROI, or what I call ROE. So when I think about it, I'm talking about looking through the lens. I'm not suggesting also, these are all foundational opening comments here, I'm also not suggesting that we keep the development lens on 100% of the time and don't ever do broad-based work. What I'm talking about is a focus on smaller audiences with depth of engagement with those populations. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of models and how I see this working at other institutions and where other schools are on this work. So if I was in a room with all of you and I could ask you to raise your hands, I would ask, how many of you have, if I literally were sitting in a room with 200 people and I said, okay, raise your hands if you, over half of your job is alumni engagement. There'd be a good chunk of you to put up your hands. If I said, how many of you are, most of your job or over half of your job is fundraising? Same, I think we get the same. And then communications will get the same. But what I often find when you look at law school advancement professionals is that they fall into this last category, where they do alumni engagement, fundraising, stewardship, communications, advancement services, events, special projects, random assignments, and other duties as assigned. That's usually the shops I've seen, the typical law school. There's some that have more specializing that goes on, which is great, but usually you're in a role that you have multiple things that you're dealing with and juggling within your own remit. Your own position description has many of these same things going on in it. And this notion of thinking about our alumni through the development lens is something that I'm not the first person to talk about, and I'm not it hasn't been all that recent either. I'm going to show you this one quote right here. Comes from a colleague, a friend of mine, a guy named Andy Shanlin, who works in the alumni engagement space as well. He's a consultant for Huron GG&A. And he wrote this quote. I'm going to show you the date when he wrote it, but what he said was the most obvious place for alumni relations and development to combine efforts is annual giving. Alumni officers, annual giving staff are talking to the same audience as students, often their parents and alumni, of course. In a law school context, less their parents, more the students and their alumni. He went on to say, fundraising is dead. And I actually agree with this. Alumni relations development are, I believe, to be more interwoven, and that's a good thing for our donors and our institution. There are still places out there, if you're an alumni professional and you're running an alumni shop, whether in the center or in any of the schools or in a law school, there are people out there who will say, my job is to be the fundraiser. Those people over there, they do the fundraising. Usually at a law school, there's a collaboration between the two. In some other larger university settings, I see that reference between the fundraisers and the fundraisers to be a difficult relationship where they will describe themselves as the good guys. We're the fundraiser. Those are the bad guys, or that's the dark side. You go over to fundraising over there, and those are the people that ask for money. We don't do that dirty work. That has blurred over the years, and I say it's almost gone away right here. And in case of Andy, he made this statement. I shared this with an audience not long ago, and I said this statement was not that recent. This statement was made back in 2008. 16 years ago, he was already saying that this was dead, and our industry has shifted to a point where there's blurred lines and integrated advancement models exist at most places. In fact, I would say that probably most of you on this call, there's 192 people joining us now, most of you on this webinar are probably in a pretty integrated advancement model, given a lot of those roles are combined, or you're collaborating very closely with the folks on the fundraising side. If you're on the alumni engagement side, or if you're a communicator, you're talking and collaborating with the fundraising side as well. So, and one of the reasons why for this is that the data is showing pretty compelling. This is correlational data I'm about to show you. The correlation between giving and, so the case, you all know the case has 4 categories. There's philanthropy that we measure, of course, around what percentage of alums are giving. But there are other 3 categories: who's going to events, who's volunteering, and then the 4th one is communications. So hold on for a second. If you're a communicator, hang on for 1 second. I'm going to show you a slide that came from CASE last year. But this is an average of a group of public institutions looking at 4 years of giving history on 3 of those. Really, it's the donor one, but also the other 2, experiential and volunteer. So what this slide is telling us, that if on the 4 bars on the far left-hand side, of that population of schools, their average giving dropped over those course of those 4 fiscal years from 10 down to 7.4%, which is around the national average. Is in the, I've seen it low down to 1 or 2%. I've seen it as high. The average is around 6 or 7%. They go up even higher. Of course, I'm sure there are people on this call who have examples that are in the double or way up into the 20 or 30% range. Those are rare. You're seeing these numbers typically right here, where you see here, 10 to 7% is where we typically will see it. And the second set of bars, obviously, are the people that have attended events over the course of those same fiscal years. So the correlational data is telling us here that it's 3 or 4 times more likely that a person who attends an event is going to be a donor. So to me, this is pretty compelling data. That part's interesting. When you go to the next one over, the set of where it says V plus D, the volunteers plus donors, these are people who are volunteers. So you go now 10 or plus % more more likelihood to be a donor if you're a volunteer. And what's even more interesting to me is not only are these percentages compelling data points right here, but when you look at the average gift, same exact population, same set of schools here, same 4 fiscal years, their average gift was hovering just above $1,000 for all 4 of those years. If you attended an event, it was going to be about twice that amount. Again, correlational, not causation here. You're talking about correlating data points here. But when you go into the volunteer side, you see it jump up even more. I was just on a call with the University of Denver, and they were showing some of their same exact data, and they show that they actually went into the volunteer side and said, if you're a one-time volunteer and do a short stint volunteer activity, a micro volunteer or a short-term one, done in a day type of volunteer activity, you're going to show some higher levels of percentage and dollar gifts. But the deeper you go into your volunteer engagement, you're on a board, you're on a council, you're on the law school board, whatever it might be. So the further you go down the continuum and depth of volunteer engagement, the even higher percentages and higher dollar amounts compared to the average overall. So we're talking now about breadth versus depth here. In this case, the deeper you can get somebody to volunteer, the more likely to be a donor at a higher level is what we're talking about with this data. And this is the case data I was referring to. This shows now all 3 of the other case. So this is comparing all the case categories to the other 3 to donor behavior. So you see the first set of bars here are volunteer activity. The second set is experiential and communications. And what you're seeing here is the likelihood of somebody being a donor if they're a volunteer or if they're going to an event or experiencing something. It could be online as well, and if they're involved in some meaningful communications. So what's interesting here is that it's pretty compelling data when you look at the blue and teal bars, but when you look at these 3 orange bars, this is professional schools. The problem with this data is that we only have 2 schools participating. So this is partly another plug here, another plea. If you're able to report to the case metrics on engagement through your law school and get your data in here, this data will improve, and I think we'll see some more. Being 2, I would say this data is probably not even all that relevant. I think when you look at the teal, the 147 schools on the far right, that teal bar in each of the categories here, those are undergrad and postgraduate combination schools. You'll see that again, that volunteer, experiential, and communications all show giving rates at a higher level. So this is sort of the industry of how it's measuring it now, how we're correlating behavioral data. There's lots of other things that are going to be done in our industry as we are better at measuring. We're going to start to see some causational things come forward, and even some predictive modeling work come down the road. So my plea to all of the folks on this call, if you're able to and have the resources to do so, please submit your data so we can get this group of the N higher, frankly, so that we can get more data and be able to look at these across a bunch of law schools instead of just the 2 that I'm not even sure if these are what other schools these are, but we need more law schools in this data set. So this is a slide I use. I call it the continuum slide. I'll make a caveat here. I've worked with 200 clients, 20 law schools, 180 broader university type central kind of programs. So what I'm going to show you here has a little focus on the center program, because that's where I spent most of my time. But what I want you to think about is where your program is as a law school advancement operation on this continuum. And what this is looking at this integrated advancement model. How alumni engagement is organized in most central shops across the country is on this continuum. On the far left-hand side, you have a central Stanford alumni program that is less about fundraising and more about a holistic alumni philosophy. We're all alumni in its breadth, and they do very sophisticated things. They have a very large staff, and it's one of the top programs in the country, frankly. But they would say is that we would still do alumni engagement whether or not we were ever raising money again. That's the far left of this continuum. On the far right, you have the University of Miami central program now that thinks about it more about fundraising, and that the work we do, if it doesn't lead to some clear movement towards a fundraising outcome, we're probably not going to do it. That's probably a little too extreme, but it's the closest I can get to it in short form here to get you an understanding that there's two sides to this. And I would argue that most schools are closer to the right, and I would argue our industry has been moving from left to right on this chart over time. And what you see underneath are these logos of other schools that are in varying places along this continuum right here. So if you're at the University of Michigan and you're in the Central Alumni Association, you're still out on that left-hand side where you're more focused on engagement and less worried about the fundraising implications. You do, it's not a zero, I'm saying, it's just not as high on the radar as Miami, or as you go further to the right here. And again, you work your way from left to right over, you'll see various school logos: Denver, Wisconsin, Indiana, University of Central Florida, Boise State, University of Miami. All of them are in some continuum. What you see on them mostly on the right-hand side, kind of from about a quarter of the way in and all the way to the far right, you'll see there's that little box that says reports to a vice president or a vice chancellor of advancement or a foundation CEO. The vast majority, if you have 2,000 universities out there across the country, 1,900 of them are going to be in that box. There's very few that are off to the left over here. The vast majority of them, the alumni position, the communications positions report into an advancement structure, sometimes to a larger, through a university vice president for communications. In a law school context, most of the time reports through a director of development or an associate dean, where they oversee all advancement functions around alumni engagement, fundraising, and communication. So they fall into an advancement structure. So there's a parallel between a law program and a centralized program here, where you see these other relationships here. So within that, you find that there are intertwined foundations and alumni associations. You have a lot of shops where alumni, there's a person who oversees alumni and annual giving as a role. At Denver, they have a person who oversees alumni and career services in their central shop, and so on. There's lots of things. So the B logo is Boise State. They actually have a really interesting model where they have the same associate vice president. Think of it like a associate dean in a law school. Same associate vice president there oversees alumni engagement, annual giving, donor relations stewardship, and communications for Boise State. And that's the model they have in a much more integrated fashion than you'll see at the schools that are on the left-hand side of this continuum. I want to pause just for a second. Jayme, I'm going to check with you or whoever is monitoring questions in chat. Has there anything come up so far that I can jump in on and respond to, or are we doing good?
Nothing as of yet.
Okay. Wowed them into silence, Jayme. All right. I'm going to keep moving. So that's the continuum. A couple of models of how this might look at other institutions. I want to show you two here. These are larger public institutions. Again, this is the central model at each of these places. The professional schools will often, well, not always, but there are times where they mirror this model or they have their own approach to it. But here's the Ohio State University. And the way they think about a contemporary engagement program is this visual. And what they have on the far left-hand side, out in the pasture there, are a group of alumni who are unaware. So if you're in a law school, you're obviously not going to have the kind of, at Ohio State, we're talking about 600,000 alumni. And probably half of them are out there in the pasture in the unaware category. And what they've built is a staffing structure that aligns with these stages that you're seeing here. So unaware to aware, they have people who are trying to move people from that unaware to aware, and so on. How do we get them more into that learning phase, participating phase, ultimately investing and advocating for us? And their little Buckeye tree there is showing the various things they can be participating in and learning about or investing in or advocating for. So that you see all these different, all in a law school context, you'd have different things there, but some of them would be the same, but different pieces there. But the point here is that there's a journey that your alums are taking, and many of them will fall out in that pasture in the distance and slowly move their way up the path. In some cases, they'll never move. They've come, they got their degree, and they're done. And they don't want to engage. And they're not going to ever be on the right-hand side of this tree. But the goal is to move people forward along this way. And the lens that I'm talking about early on about the development lens is where should we spend our time trying to move these people to the right side of this tree in this model? It should be on those people who have that capacity, in my opinion, when we put on that development lens. So this is the journey that Ohio State builds. A very similar model here at University of Colorado, Boulder. They have their buffalo climbing the mountain here. Given where they are, this analogy made sense, I think. And they have very similar stages. Out in the patch there, number one. These are the silent. We don't know where they are. They have some, do not contact code on their database. They're out there and unaware, and we're unaware of them. Number two is this aware group. They've participated in some or any one of those four, case engagement categories. Again, they're philanthropy, experiential, volunteer, and communication. So if you hit one of those markers for them, you're in that number two category. Number three for them is that you're doing some communication and or philanthropy. So you're now becoming a little bit more active. You're showing signs that you have interest in what's going on at, in this case, Colorado Boulder. And they're getting number four, they're starting to get to the base of the mountain. They're active and that they're going to an event and probably making an annual gift. And the journey up the mountain in nesting is that it participates in volunteerism and or philanthropy, and at the very top, someone that participates in all four case categories. If you have, I'll give you an example of a larger public institution. They have 200,000 alumni. They had less than 1,000 people in that number six category. So if you have an alumni population of 20,000 at your law school, and I know there's ranges of what size what size your alumni populations are, but if you have a 20,000 population, you're talking about 100 people who are going to hit all four case categories. So it's very small population of people. And what we're going to talk about a little bit in this ABCD approach, I'm going to walk you through this here in a moment, is how do we get the right people to head down that path so that when they get to the top of the mountain, we have the right people there. Again, right people being with that development lens on is saying these people have the capacity to make a significant gift to our institutions. All right, so the ABCD approach, I'm going to show you a model that we built. I was at Cornell University for 5 years, and we built this model around our sesquicentennial. And really the charge I was given by the vice president is how do we implement a segmented and targeted engagement strategy over 4 years to build a sustainable advancement program as we head into Cornell's sesquicentennial. This was around 2010, 11, and their sesquicentennial was going to be in 2015. So this was the charge I was given, and we were said, the approach was how do we get, basically, we're going to still do broad-based engagement. We want to make sure the depth of our engagement is going to be focused on getting those right people in the room. And here's how the population broke out. So we had 224,000 alumni across the institution. This includes a law school. There were, I forget the exact law school number in that, but they were in this total number. And what we were talking about here is when we looked at an engaged group of a population of people that were going to do, climb that mountain in the Colorado version or be under the tree in the Ohio State model. In the Cornell, we didn't have a visual like that, but basically what we looked at was the 224,000 people and said there's going to be 3,000 people who are going to be at this top level. Roughly speaking, these are principal, maybe high-level major gift and principal gift donors in our world, about 1% of the population, 3,000 people. And these are rough numbers. I rounded, of course, for the purpose of the presentation. Major gift donors, maybe some high-level leadership annual gifts were in here as well, but roughly 8,000 people that major gift, about 4%. When we looked at the broader annual fund, we actually had a participation rate of around 25 to 30%. So 60,000 of our alums were doing something and supporting the institution at that annual fund level. We thought of them as a C level. I added another level in here as we were going along. I realized that there was a group of people who were, I call them D pluses, who were going to events and they were volunteering. We weren't yet measuring communications back in 2015. This was before 2011. This was before the case had the four categories. We would have added communications in here and it would have been a bigger number. But non-donors who were, in our case here, volunteering and attending events, we found another about 7,000 people there, about 3%. And then and the unengaged group was this other, almost 2/3 of the population. 146,000 people was everybody else. And if you look at this on a visual from an not org chart, but from a pie chart here is what you're going to see here in a second. what you'll find is that you have 2/3 of the alumni who, in a traditional alumni program or communications effort, you're going to try to talk to everybody in this pie the same way and engage them the same way. And what we quickly learned was there's 2/3 of the people who we need to keep communicating with in probably the way we're currently doing it. But there's other people who are in this other third, the smaller pieces of the pie, who we need to talk to differently, communicate with differently, invite to events, involve in volunteer roles, etc., in a different way. And this allowed us to focus our efforts on a population. Instead of worrying about 224,000 people, we were worried about, whatever, I forgot my numbers here, are 75,000 people roughly. So it allowed for more focus. There's a school we're working with right now who have a population of 360,000 alumni. And the VP said, I have nowhere near the resources to and try to engage, communicate with, or raise money from, or get them to volunteer from 360,000 people. And they took this approach and applied it across their population and found that they have 300,000 people who were their Ds. And what he said was, this is a vice president for advancement in a central program. He said, I do have the resources to try to engage and focus on those 60,000 people. So again, it's a disciplined approach on getting the right people in the room, the right people to volunteer, the right people that we're communicating with in the right way.
We do have a question.
Go ahead, Heather. Yeah.
No, yeah, sorry. I don't want to interrupt the great flow
Please.
here. But one comment and then one question. So I think this is from a communicator. I would love to see that bar chart from the beginning with communications metrics added. So something like email opens, clicks, abandonment, people who are purchasing something but abandon their cart. So that's the first comment. And then the second is a question. Do you think that there are benefits to educating your staff and faculty about what your advancement model looks like at your institution? Do you think this would help leverage engagement opportunities and create a culture of philanthropy within the school? Yeah.
So let me hit the first one real quick, and I'll come back to that. The first comment, and I'll come back to the question. So I agree. We need more communications data. Not just this is the case chart, but my charts didn't have any communication. These were done and started a long time before we were collecting that data. So I had like 10 years of data on that. But for case to get more robust data around the communication points you were talking about, we need more people to participate in this process. So yes, and the communicators of the world, they have very detailed click-through rates, open rates, abandonment, all those things that you just talked about. Are going to be important that we measure, and they will correlate. What we're finding nationally, there's been some studies on this, is that roughly speaking, it falls into the same category as events. Is that you're twice as likely to be a donor at twice the level if you're communicating in some meaningful way with alma mater. So those are some early trend national data that we're seeing. And back to the second question, really comment was a question, was communicating sort of internally about building a culture of philanthropy. I believe that advancement, fundraising, and alumni engagement, communications are a team sport. And the more people know about what it is you're trying to do, the better they'll understand what we're ultimately trying to accomplish. So communicating your goals and in fact, I'm a really strong advocate of involving them in the planning process before we even go out to them with what our goals are. So and I talk about bringing in partners from our admissions area, from our student engagement area, from our career development area, from et cetera. When we build a plan around alumni engagement or for advancement, you bring them into the process so that when we go to implement the plan that we've put together, they've been part of generating what we've created so they understand that they're all playing a role in, you think about engaging alumni in the law school context, it doesn't just come out of the alumni person on the team or the advancement person. Alumni engagement goes all the way up to the dean, and everybody across the school are going to be involved in some way in engaging alumni and understanding what our goals are and outcomes we're trying to get to. Sometimes it's the dollar goal. Sometimes it might be we want to get all our kids hired or graduates hired, or or help in terms of recruitment and getting more kids to apply and come to blank law school. Those are all places where alumni can play a role, and understanding what those outcomes are early on in the process, I think is critical, and getting that buy-in from across the whole unit is going to be where you're going to see the most success. Schools that have built that culture, excuse me, are the ones that see that long sustainable success. And many of you know those schools and for their reputations, because they built that into their overall approach. Let me show you this next slide here. Heather, I hope I addressed the question there. If I didn't, jump in again and ask me another way.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. That was great.
So I want to leave time at the end for Q&A. So we're at one, I'm checking my time clock here. We're doing all right. So when we implemented this, again, it was at the center, but we applied it across even the schools across, we had 10 colleges and schools across the university. The goal in doing this, our expectations out of this were that we're going to really focus on enhancing the volunteer pipeline, getting the right people into the funnel, if you will, to get into volunteer roles, was a critical focus area for us here. We wanted to make sure we were doing things to support the development pipeline, not just, moving someone who's a non-donor to be an annual donor, right? That's important. But you'll see in a second, I have another chart about how we spent time working with our A and B level alumni to make sure they were feeling connected to the institution from an alumni engagement standpoint, so that they're more likely to go forward with making that large gift. I'll show you that in just a moment. Of course, you want to move people who are in the D category up into a more engaged category, whether it's a gift or another level. Delivering those key messages from a communication standpoint, delivering key messages to key audiences that go as far as to say as, what we say, how we say it, who we say it to, and who's it coming from, and all that are going to be important to think about. You can't do that with your entire population, but you can do it for a smaller targeted segmented population. That's the beauty of this exercise. And I would argue that most places are already doing this. They just don't call it ABCD. And what I'm talking about here is building a more disciplined, strategic approach to focusing on those top people, and not it being a happenstance or a random outcome. This also allowed us to focus our regional activity. We, instead of trying to be all things to all people, we focused on the regions where we had, there was a point where maintaining 80 clubs was considered success in alumni engagement work. Maintaining the top 10 that have the highest concentrations of folks in these categories is a different outcome that we were approaching now to try to focus where we're going to do our regional activity. This is a chart that I created later on. This is not what we used at Cornell. Our numbers were slightly different. The gift level numbers might change depending on your institution, but basically the definitions of an ABCD, A, principal, high level major, B, major, maybe lag, high annual leadership annual gifts might be in that bucket. Again, those numbers could fluctuate. Everyone else is in the donor C category, the annual fund level. And volunteers, you'll see there's some, I'll show you an example here in a couple of slides of a slightly different definition where they took it a little bit more broadly and they added an E. You'll see that here in a second. And the D is that, future donors. Again, that column that's under gift level can fluctuate depending upon your institution. Don't get stuck on those numbers. This is just a basic model. This is what I was referencing earlier. This is what we thought about the goals of what we wanted to see out of this ABC. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. Number 4, we were always identifying, so our alumni staff in the center and our alumni staff in the law school were trained to help identify wealth so that you can find potential A and B level alumni who just weren't on the radar yet. And we were finding those people in all different populations. That was number 4. Number 3, of course, wanted to move people out of the D category and into some level of activity and engagement, attending an event, volunteering, or now communicating, and also being a donor. Number 2 is that we work very closely with our annual giving colleagues. In fact, we moved our whole operation to be co-located with our annual giving team so that we can spend more time thinking about how can we play a role in making sure that people that are C's stay C's. This is retention of our annual donors and making sure that that giving percentage stayed up. And then the first one here was number 1 on this list here is that we spent time working with our principal gift and major gift folks on how are we going to target engagement activity, communications activity to the alums who are in that A and B category. And we're talking about a handful of people each year. And in a law school context, it's going to be a very small number of people. But what we were saying was, what do we got to do over the course of FY25 to make sure that that person we're going to ask for a major gift is going to be most likely to say yes to us. And we're going to do things throughout the year from an alumni engagement, from a communication standpoint, to get that person, that particular person, not large population. We're talking about an individual targeted strategy now to make sure that those people were going to be more inclined to say yes to that ask when the time came. And that includes specific communications things that were sent to those individuals. That includes building events around certain people, having that person attend key events and introduce the president or the dean or whatever it might be. There's, again, very specific strategies, because you can focus that on a small number. You can't do that for 224,000 or 20,000 or 5,000, but you can for 5. And the point of this is to get you to the point where you're able to focus your efforts on those top people to move the needle on the things we need to move. So PowerPoint slide warning coming at you. The next slide is another institution. It's Providence College and their model of ABCD. And they took it a little bit further. They went to an E, and it's a lot on the slide. So I'll walk you through it pretty quickly. I won't belabor it, but you'll see how they applied it to their world. So this is a school that's got 60 some odd thousand alumni. And they went from left to right, A, B, C, D, E for them. They added this other category. Their E is basically what I defined as a D, and they kind of split out their C's into C's and D's, a little bit different levels here. So then if you look at the first and second columns, you're talking about the definitions are principal, major, and their lifetime giving. So all very much development related columns here. And when you go to the second, well, I should say 1, 2, 3, 4, the column that says capacity, affinity / inclination. These are other markers that they were going to bring into the equation to say that person is an A or a B or a C. And then the next one over, you see volunteer status. You may not have any of those capacity rankings or ability to give, but you're in one of these other volunteer groups, we're to consider you in that category as well. And what they're building out right now is that very last column, which is the other indicators. And you'll see that for them, their fold is their priors of the last decade at Providence College, where they're building out a approach to their young alumni. They're going to include certain levels of people being A, B's, and C's that have a slightly different definition. So as long as you're hitting any of those markers there, you qualify in that you are in that category. And one other note on this is not something that is this is a back end, how we operate in our office. This is how the sausage is made. It helps you focus, helps provide the strategy and ultimately the tactics you need to deliver on various aspects of engagement, communication, and so on to these groups that are in these different levels. So this is not something where you go out and share with people who's in what category. I hope that's obvious. This is an internal approach of how you think about your population. Heather, you have another question?
Yeah, Chris, we got 2 more that came in. One is kind of related to what you were just saying. In this approach, are you abandoning the giving participation percentage? So a lot of schools are, very public about that percent of how many people give. And then the second part of it is focusing more on events and engagement with donors.
Yeah. So the answer to the first question, I'm not abandoning it. I do think it's a marker and indicator. But I would much rather see an institution, a law school, a central program, overall university reporting on their engagement data and their engagement percentage, their case score, if you will, than their percent giving score. Because the engagement score includes your giving percentage in it. It also includes people. To me, it's a better measure of who's engaged with your institution. Is that if you're communicating, experiencing, volunteering, or giving, or doing any one of those 4 things or all 4 of them, you count in the numerator, right? So your engagement percentage includes the giving part. I would rather see schools focusing on engagement rate than giving rate. I do know that there are boards, there are deans, there are even boards of trustees and college presidents who, I was just on a call earlier today where the entire call was to get the board of trustees to stop worrying about the giving percentage and focus on engagement and getting to $1 billion campaign goal. And that's a whole different way of thinking. The KPI there is it's a mind shift for a board of trustees to move away. So I guess the answer to the question is, am I encouraging people to do away with giving percentage? I think I am, is the answer, to be totally honest, because I think there's other markers that are more important that include giving. And I also know that the national trend is a downward line to the right, no matter where you are, no matter what school. The national trend in giving, we've gone from, as an industry, in 1992, the average giving rate was in the 20% range, high teens, and it's now 6 or 7%. And it's gone down steadily every single year. And if you put your institution against that, you're going to see similar trend line going down. Very few are flat. And I don't know, I may name a couple that have gone up over the years, but most schools are trending downward. Given that downward trend, and there's lots of other factors in the equation as to why this is happening, my encouragement is to think about a broader definition of how we define success in our work, and engagement, I think, is the right number there. So there's that. And the second question, I think, Heather, I heard what you say is, are we focusing on getting donors to be engaged and attending events? Is that?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So yes is the short answer to that question. Absolutely yes. I think we should be thinking about people who have capacity, who are donors, who have inclination. If we can measure any of those things, and most schools have data on those, is targeting them in a different way to attend our events, to become our volunteers, and to communicate with us in some meaningful way. Those are the three other case categories. I am not saying, so to me, that's a depth strategy. How do we get more people who have those indicators to be involved with our program? I don't think you abandon a breadth strategy completely, because if you do, you'll succeed in this campaign or this current fundraising year, and eventually the long term will hurt because you're not doing the stuff to build the base of people. So it's a matter of how you focus and where you deploy your resources. How much time and money are we spending on this population versus this population? I think both are important, one for the long term, one other for the short term. But what I'm addressing with this approach is that our industry of alumni engagement has focused on the entire population the same way forever. And I'm suggesting that we need to keep doing that, but also do this other more focused version of it. All right, so Heather,
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And I'll just say there was one more question that came in. Sorry. Yep. You mentioned affinity groups earlier, and someone said these groups that we have were formed to help raise money for our campaign, which was very successful. Do you have recommendations, or have you seen schools, transition post-campaign to how to use these groups for engagement purposes?
Yeah, it's a hard problem. There are even many schools that struggle with, you build up this work in a campaign, you have all these volunteers who did that work, and now they're sunset, but they're interested, right? You also have the same exact problem with alumni boards who you've built up, and they've gone through the process and they've cycled off, and they're sitting out there. And I've even seen it at a board of trustee level at a university, where you have these people at the most highest engaged level you can be, who sunset off, their terms are out, and they're out there, and there's dozens of them who feel like they've left the planet and they're not engaged at the institution anymore. So whoever you do that, having a concerted effort to focus on engaging past volunteers, getting them into new volunteer roles, and if they don't want those, to keep communicating with them in a meaningful way, to keep them connected to the institution, is critical. And that's a target audience. That's an A-B population there from a volunteer standpoint. One of the categories that the slide before that I had up for Providence, one of the reasons they did that is they want to be able to capture those people at a higher level so that we continue to communicate with them and engage them in ways that are meaningful. So it's a whole litany of things that you can do with that population of people, but knowing who they are, tracking them appropriately in your database, and making sure we have at least a communication strategy with them is going to cover the vast majority of the concerns under this broad category of how do you deal with past high-level volunteers. What you get them to go to and ultimately volunteer to help do might be nuanced based on your institution, kind of where you are in your history, but it's in a population I would definitely pay attention to. My answer to the question.
Chris, you just brought up a good point about meaningful engagement opportunities. And another question that just popped into the chat is, How do you find schools and universities are defining what meaningful engagement looks like?
Well, the definition of engagement is something that, so I was on the case task force that came up with the definition of alumni. It took us 5 hours. Definition of engagement, that took us like 7 hours. But the baseline is engagement can look lots of ways. You know, you have alums who wear your sweatshirt and put your license plate frame on their car and they hang their diploma behind their desk. Those are all people who care and are passionate. You know, they love their alma mater. But you can't measure any of those things I just mentioned, right? They all count as engagement and they all would be something that would indicate it. So the baseline of what we talked about was what I call reasonably measurable engagement is the experiential, communications, volunteer, and philanthropy. Meaningful is when you go deeper into those things. You're going to multiple events. You're coming back to campus for a multi-day reunion instead of going to something in your hometown. You're volunteering not just for a day to do X or an hour to call a prospective student or convince somebody why they should go to blank law school. That's a volunteer activity, but someone who sits on your board, someone who, you know, is coming back to campus on a regular basis as a volunteer, someone who is helping moderate a chat or a social media channel or Facebook page. Those are all deeper engagement acts that I would put in the meaningful category. So these are things that are going to get people spending more time, more effort, more, you know, the old time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony. Those are my 5 T's that I throw out there. Those 5 T's are all things that people can do with more intentionality, with more depth that I think equal meaningful engagement. I think I'm answering the question, Jayme. If I need to rephrase or restate, let me know.
No, I think you did. Thank you.
Good. So I was hoping so I use the term A's and B's. These are likely to be tracked prospects assigned to gift portfolios of your gift officers. You may have another system you use, but I was hoping that a few people might, I don't know, is it even possible? I apologize, I don't know the answer to this question, but can people come off mute and share, or would they have to put it in their chat or in their questions? Jayme, I'm asking you this question. I don't think they can come off.
I think they're going to have to put this into chat if they want to.
Yeah, apologies, I did not know that part. So if you have a chance to, because this will be recorded for going forward, if you're already doing something with a targeted population of your top donors from an alumni engagement or a communication standpoint, and you've said, we're going to treat that group differently, or maybe you haven't even said it, you just started doing it, right? It may be a tactical thing you're doing, not a strategic thing. I would love for you to put examples of these into the chat or into the Q&A so that we can have them for later on. Because I think most schools are already doing this, some version of this. What I'm providing is a framework for it. Frankly, what I'm providing for many clients is a common language for how to think about this. We started doing this, and after a while, people would say, you know, we're going to do this blank event. It's an ABCD event. Everyone's going to be included in it. Great, go for it. We knew how to deploy resources towards that. But when someone said, look, I think we need to do this event, it's really an A-B event. And we're going to focus it on in this way to accomplish this outcome. That changed the game of what resources and who was involved and how we were going to approach it. So it allowed us a common language, quite frankly, to discuss these things internally. I'm looking at the chat, see if anything's coming in. Jayme, do you see anything yet? Or
yeah, there's a couple, one person just posted, we do news stories on donors for our annual magazine or website.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So I've seen that a lot. You know, having your top donors host events in their homes during a campaign, you know, series of events around the country where you bring out the law school dean and you're going to go to a location where you may not have a main event, but you may have like a salon-like event. A lot of those A's and B's can be your host for events. They can introduce the dean at a larger scale of event. Those are opportunities I see a lot of people already doing. Heather, did you have something?
There was a question related to what you were just talking about. Basically, in the change management idea, you know, do you abandon those people that are out in the pasture at some point, given limited resources? And, you know, how do you kind of get people behind this ABCD idea?
Yeah, it's a great question. If you were a for-profit company The answer to that question is you probably would abandon those people out there. You wouldn't abandon them. You'd still have commercials hoping that they would get them, right? I'm thinking of like, I fly United Airlines. And I am a B, probably in United category. There's people that fly more than me that are A's. I fly a lot, and I'm a B. But the people that fly once a year are not on United's radar to treat differently. They're out in the pasture. They're going to get the commercial at halftime of the Super Bowl or whatever and be aware that United is an option for them, right? It's not a target audience. The for-profit says we're going to put our resources towards our most loyal customers to make sure that they're really happy and they keep flying with us in the United example. I'm using a for-profit customer-centric thing, but if you apply that same thinking to our world, I would suggest that you don't forget about them. I think what you do with that population is that you use digital and artificial intelligence strategies to continue to communicate and engage them. And when they raise their hand and they pop up above a D and become a D+ and they show up in some way, then we bring them into the fold and treat them a little differently. But until then, I don't think it's worth, with limited resources, I don't think it's worth spending time trying to get your, let's take a number, Heather and Jayme, how many alumni do each of you have at your institutions in the law school context? Give me a baseline roughly.
We're just shy of 13,300 here.
13,000, all right. And Heather?
We're pretty small because we're young, only 3,000.
3,000. So even that, let's take the 13,000 number in Indiana, right? If we applied this strategy to it, you're going to take 10,000 people and put them out there and say, we're going to focus on these 2,500 people at a C and these 500 people at A, B. And Jayme, your job is completely different to try to make sure those 500 people are having the airline experience that United wants their top flyers to have in terms of your law school alums to have with their institution. They have access to the dean, they have, so on. There's lots of things that come with that. I think you scale it that way. It provides you the ability to focus your resources, again, time, your staff, and so on, your budget on those top 500 people. I'm also aware it's 3 minutes till 2 and I have to stop. So other questions that are anything else come in the chat?
There was one additional comment to answer your question about A's and B's.
Yeah.
Re-engagement of former board members through twice a year state of the school sessions. I know here at Indiana University with our board of visitors, we've started to engage the former board members each year for one meeting. So it sounds like that could be a potential way to keep people engaged at those high levels.
Let me show my last 2 slides here in the last couple minutes. This is something that I use to help people make decisions. When I work with clients, I say these are the 6 questions you must ask before we do anything. So this is taking into account all the stuff you do, any initiative that you have. We want someone to become a volunteer. We're going to communicate with them in some way. We're going to invite them to an event and so on. I think you need to ask these 6 questions before you do anything. Number 1, first of all, you should have a plan. The assumption here is that you have a plan. And the first question is, does it align with that plan? Second question is, what's the desired outcome? Third one, who's the target audience? This is getting into the details of what we've just been talking about. I think as an industry, we do a pretty good job of asking these 3 questions. We've gotten better at this 4th one, how we're going to measure the success of this. And Case has given us a framework to help do some of that at an early stage. I think I'm going to make a comment here that could be controversial in this context, but if you work in the center or work in the law school or you're collaborating or not collaborating with, I don't think we do this number 5 very well. Who else on campus needs to know? There are often times where the center has no idea what the law school is doing and vice versa. There are times where I've seen them work together. And I think the more we can ask the question about who else needs to know that we're doing this, the better. That's my 5th question. And then the 6th one is, I don't think we do this at all. I don't even give us a grade on this one because I think we have an incomplete, which is, what's the plan to follow up after it's over? Because what happens in most alumni shops in the law school or in the central program, you move on to the next thing, the next tactic, the next busy work things coming down your lane, and you don't have time to do follow-up from the first thing. I'd say slow down, take the time. That was my alarm to shut up, and do a follow-up that's needed after each thing. So I will stop there and I'll put up one last slide that just gives you my email address. If you have questions, follow-up comments, or thoughts, please feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy. I will respond to you.